we were able to obtain a life-size copy of this ballot so that we could show you exactly how big it is.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone.
The Toronto St. Paul's by-election was a historic one, not only because the Conservative Don Stewart was able to wrestle a long-held seat away from the Liberals, but also because there were a record 84 candidates on the ballot for voters to choose from. We had the opportunity to correspond with Elections Canada and ask some questions regarding this unusual by-election, and here's what they had to say.
Let's take a look.
The first question we asked is, what is a by-election and when is one called?
Simply put, a by-election is an election held in a single electoral district. More than one by-election may be held at the same time.
A by-election is held to fill a vacancy in the House of Commons that comes about other than through the dissolution of the House for a general election. This is typically after the resignation or the death of an MP.
Under the Parliament of Canada Act, when a seat in the House becomes vacant, the Speaker of the House of Commons informs the Chief Electoral Officer by means of a Speaker's warrant. If the Speaker is absent, or if it is the Speaker's seat that is vacant, two members of the House of Commons may address the warrant to the Chief Electoral Officer. The Parliament of Canada Act includes an exception where a vacancy occurs in the 9 months before a fixed date general election. In that case, no by-election is called and the seat remains vacant until the general election.
After receiving the warrant, Section 57 of the Canada Elections Act authorizes the Governor and Council to fix the date on which the Chief Electoral Officer is to issue the writ. The date of issuance must fall between the 11th and 180th days after the Chief Electoral Officer receives the warrant from the Speaker, or in some cases, two members of the House. The Governor and Council also fixes the date for an election day, which cannot be earlier than 36 days or later than 50 days after the Chief Electoral Officer issues the writ.
So for the next question, this was specifically around Toronto St. Paul. We understand that there were 84 candidates listed on the ballot for the recent Toronto St. Paul's by-election. What unique challenges may have arisen from having so many candidates on the ballot?
The answer we received was that due to the number of candidates listed on the ballot for Toronto St. Paul's by-election, the ballot needed to be adapted in a manner that was different from what is prescribed in the Elections Canada Act. This ballot was to be larger than usual and had 2 columns of candidate names. The names were listed alphabetically from the top to the bottom of the left column and continuing down the right column.
The natural follow-up question to this is, why were there so many names on the ballot in the first place? Now, this wasn't a question for Elections Canada, and ironically, the answer comes from the CBC.
So the answer is that dozens of independent candidates entered the race as part of an organized protest against Canada's first-past-the-post voting system. Quote, "We need to highlight the fact that our voting system is a joke and is producing results that are completely inaccurate and distorted," end quote, said Glenn MacDonald, a candidate in Toronto St. Paul's and a volunteer with the group, the Longest Ballot Committee.
Now, the irony is that most of the people that seem to be taking part in these protests were former Justin Trudeau voters, because as we all recall, in 2015, one of the promises that he was running on is to abolish the first past the post system shortly after he became prime minister. He was even quoted as saying, "This 2015 election will be the last first past the post election."
Well, and he kept that as well as his other promises.
Oh yeah, he kept all of them as well as that one, absolutely. The next question was, is 84 an actual record for the number of candidates appearing on an election ballot in Canada?
The ballot for the by-election in Toronto St. Paul's lists more candidates, 84, than any other ballot for a single riding in a federal general election or by-election. Previously, the largest number of candidates on a single ballot was 48, which was in a by-election in the riding of Winnipeg South Centre in 2023, which was also a protest from the longest ballot committee.
Now, we know that Elections Canada does not use electronic ballots. So how big was the ballot for the Toronto St. Paul's by-election? Was it multiple pages?
And the answer that we received directly from Elections Canada was that the ballot at Toronto St. Paul was approximately 30 centimeters by 90 centimeters, or 12 inches by 35.5 inches. Elections Canada has a sample of this ballot available on its website so that voters could see the difference between this ballot and a regular ballot. But we were able to obtain a life-size copy of this ballot so that we could show you exactly how big it is. Look at the size of this thing. This is 3 feet long and about a foot wide. This is huge.
And this is what voters actually were having to deal with on that day. And this completely explains why it would have taken Elections Canada so freaking long to actually count the ballots. You have to use this.
Right, and it has 2 columns, you can see, which is very unusual for a ballot. They actually had to go against what Canada Elections Act was saying in terms of how ballots are supposed to be written. And they came up with this monstrosity of a ballot. It's huge.
So this is the actual size that voters were actually given. We didn't blow this up. This is life size. Yeah, so that's crazy, folks. Crazy. 84 people on that ballot.
So naturally, we asked if the number of names on the ballot posed any difficulty for voters, and here's what we were told.
We are in the process of reviewing how the by-election went, as we do after each by-election. We are not aware of any systemic issues of voters having difficulty with the ballot. We encourage electors who had concerns to contact the returning officer who had tools and personnel at their disposal to help accommodate them. As we do for each election and by-election, we put in place multiple accessibility tools, including a large print list of candidates at every polling place on advanced polling days and election day. Magnifiers and large grip pencils will also be available. Braille voting templates, this is always available, but was modified to fit the 2-column ballot for this by-election, and Braille lists of candidates.
You know, I do just want to say that Elections Canada does an excellent job of making voting accessible to all Canadian citizens. And the Toronto St. Paul's by-election was no exception, especially given the unusual size of that giant ballot that we just saw.
So our next question was, we know that Elections Canada has an excellent record of providing preliminary results on election night, but there seemed to be a delay with the results of the Toronto St. Paul's by-election. What specifically caused the delay?
And the answer we received direct from Elections Canada was that the counting of ballots from yesterday's by-election in Toronto St. Paul's went well, even though things took longer than usual. The unusual dimensions of the ballot itself meant that some steps took more time than usual. Generally speaking, delays compounded across several steps over the course of the night. For example, unfolding each ballot took longer. There were more ballot boxes, reporting vote tallies required additional time, etc. As always, the counting and reporting process was done by hand in front of candidates' representatives. The count continued into the night until all results were published online, and we thank everyone involved. We always do our best to share election results as soon as possible after the polls close, but maintaining the integrity and transparency of counts is always first priority. We will take the time to evaluate the delivery of the by-election and will share our assessment with Canadians in a forthcoming report, as we do after each electoral event. You know, I think that's something that I hadn't considered, was that because you have these gigantic ballots that you have to fold multiple times to get into the ballot box, that the ballot box is going to get full a lot faster. So therefore, there's going to be a lot more ballot boxes that are required in order to conduct the election.
Right. Like one of those ballots is probably worth between 10 and 20 of the normal ballots. So,
like just in terms of size, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So you would have a lot more boxes with ballots in them than you normally, would expect. So it actually would have compounded, to their point, almost every step along the electoral process. So no wonder they had logistical problems, navigating this stuff. But, that's, I guess, one of the quote unquote challenges with a non-electronic system. But as usual in elections, a non-electronic system is the least prone to tampering.
Well, and Elections Canada prides itself on its ability to count all of its ballots the same night as the election, and they always do a fantastic job of it. They get Canadians the results that we want to know as soon as they're able. And they had done trials. I don't think it was during an election. I think it was just kind of like a mock trial run where they had used electronic ballot counting machines, and they found, you know what, we can count it just as fast by hand. So using an electronic machine doesn't provide us any value, so we're not going to do it.
Well, and it also mitigates, possible external tampering.
Oh, absolutely.
So next question, who counts the ballots at each polling station? Is it volunteers, Elections Canada officials, etc.? Who is it?
Yeah, so this was a question I had asked because I legit wasn't sure who does the counting. What we learned was that the ballot counting procedures for federal elections are set out in the Elections Canada Act. Among other things, they establish who is authorized to count ballots and set the requirement for the presence of candidates, candidate representatives, or other non-Elections Canada witnesses. Ballots are always counted by hand and always in front of witnesses.
So who are they counted by?
So we can get this answer by going to the link that we've got in the description here under counting votes and polling stations. It says, immediately after the close of a polling station, an election officer who is assigned to the polling station shall count the votes in the presence of A, another election official who is assigned to the polling station, and B, any candidates or their representatives who are present, or if no candidates or representatives are present, at least 2 electors. It is counted by the election officer, and it has to be in the presence of another election officer and either the candidate and their representatives or 2 other electors. And the final question that we asked is, where can Canadians go if they want to learn more about Elections Canada and the work that you do?
So if electors wish to learn more about our work, they may visit our website at www.elections.ca. We regularly share important information and reminders on social media, and electors may follow us at electionscan_e on Instagram, at electionscan_e on Twitter, and Elections Canada E on YouTube, as well as Elections Canada on Facebook.
So there you have it. We were able to speak directly with Elections Canada regarding some of the questions that we had, and no doubt that you had as well, regarding the Toronto St. Paul's by-election and about our elections in general.